You're looking at Mount Whitney, the tallest peak in the lower 48 states, about 14,500 feet, more than 10,000 feet above where I'm standing here at its base near Lone Pine, California. And on the other side of Mount Whitney is the big backcountry wilderness of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. In the past century and a half, most of our national parks in the West have focused on preserving and interpreting our natural wonders. But in recent decades, many national park units have been established to preserve and interpret our history, to make sure that important American stories are never lost. And one of them is right nearby, Manzanar National Historic Site.
Sometimes I walk around and I can feel the trauma that exists on this 1 square mile.
Bernadette Johnson is superintendent of Manzanar National Historic Site, one of 10 remote locations in the U.S. where more than 120,000 Japanese Americans and immigrants from Japan were confined against their will during World War II.
We strive to preserve the experiences of those incarcerated and give voice to their experiences.
Torn from their homes, their ways of life, and most of their worldly belongings shortly after the Empire of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, over 10,000 people were imprisoned behind barbed wire here in Manzanar, simply for being of Japanese descent.
We want the story to be told so that it doesn't happen to anybody again.
Manzanar is located along Highway 395 near the town of Lone Pine, about an 8-hour drive from the Bay Area.
The first group that arrived here on April 1st, 1942, and they were from Bainbridge Island in Washington.
In the shadow of the soaring Sierra, Manzanar is dramatic but desolate, a far cry from the lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest.
A place like this had to seem like the other side of the moon for people.
This alien moonscape quickly became a crowded city, monitored by armed guards and towers around its perimeter.
Every block had 14 barracks, some central buildings, a men and women's latrine, a laundry room, and an ironing room. And then at the back of the block was a mess hall.
The National Park Service used historic photographs and first-person accounts to build replica barracks and other structures.
What people got when they came in here was a cot.
Welcoming new arrivals here were sparse, cold, and dusty accommodations.
The first days, I think, were truly traumatic. That's what I hear from former incarcerees.
Loss of privacy for proud and private people was a constant challenge. Almost everything was open, communal, and noisy. The mess halls, the latrines, uncomfortable, unfamiliar. But still, children played as they normally would and went to school. On a chalkboard, a recent visitor had this to say:
"The Sierra stands as a silent witness." Imagine all the things the Sierra has seen on this 1 square mile.
From native Paiute people being forced off this land to Japanese Americans being forced onto it, the High Sierra has witnessed it all.
So as we look around, there's a lot of desert scrub around here, but there were barracks right here. And one of the things that we discovered through an oral history interview by a woman who was a child during incarceration was that she said her father built a pond.
Ponds and gardens, artistic jewels built by internees and buried by drifting sand after Manzanar's closing at the end of the war, have now been unearthed and revealed. A gem like this that speaks volumes to someone's desire to have beauty in his life and for his family and for his community, despite everything.
Correct. I think that these gardens really provided a sense of solace, contemplation, and just a respite from what they were enduring.
Poignant, powerful, and untold personal stories were also buried in this place. But the late Sue Kunutomi Embry, who arrived here as a teenager in 1942, led a group of about 150 in 1969 to end their long silence and begin an annual pilgrimage of healing and remembrance to Manzanar, arguing successfully over the years that it become a National Historic Site where their stories could be told truthfully and never be forgotten.
We want these stories to be preserved so that in 50 years, 100 years, voices like Sue Embry will still be here telling the stories of what happens if we don't protect our fellow citizens.
The magnificent Visitor Center tells those stories through compelling displays, and the National Park Service continues to gather first-hand accounts from aging former incarcerees, thanks to financial support from a generous nonprofit partner, the Fund for People in Parks.
The lessons learned here are that our constitutional rights are fragile, and that fear and racism resulted in the 10 camps being established, and that it's just too important of a lesson to forget.
Bernadette and I end our day of reflection just beyond the barbed wire. Beneath the Sierras towering Mount Williamson, we visit a small cemetery where those who died in Manzanar are honored and always remembered.
The monument behind us, I retow is what it says. The translation, as I understand it, is soul consoling tower. And how many souls needed to be consoled here? In the end of April 2019 will mark the 50th anniversary of members of the Japanese American community and other supporters of this story coming together in this space, in this landscape, in the shadow of Mount Williamson, in the shadow of this monument, to console their own soul, to make a difference, to continue to tell these stories so that we can avoid the mistakes of our past, so that stain on our nation's history will never be rubbed out or forgotten, so that we can learn from our mistakes.